Okay, Joni.
Welcome to today's webinar. This is part 2, Implications to Enhance Services for Gender Diverse Individuals. And I just want to make sure we are recording this.
Yep.
This webinar is sponsored by the Northeast and Caribbean Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, or the MHTTC, which is housed at Rutgers School of Health Professions, the Department of Psychiatric Rehabilitation. My name is Joni Dolce, and I'm a project associate with the MHTTC, and will be facilitating today's webinar. The MHTTC is funded by SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, to enhance the capacity of the behavioral health and other related workforces to deliver evidence-based and empirically supported practices to individuals with mental illnesses. Please visit the MHTTC Network website for additional information at mhttcnetwork.org. Before we begin the webinar, I wanted to quickly review some housekeeping items. Today's webinar is part 2 of a 2-part series. And in order to receive a certificate of completion for your participation, you will need to have attended both of these webinars. We also wanted to ask that you complete the survey that you will receive via email following this webinar, part 2. We value this feedback and use it to improve our activities and inform future activities. The surveys are also important because our continued funding is linked to the completion of these surveys. So we thank you in advance for your feedback. We also want to let you know that this webinar is being recorded and will be posted to our website. Lastly, this webinar will be interactive. On your screen, you have a taskbar at the bottom with buttons that say Q&A and chat. Please use the Q&A feature to ask our presenter questions throughout the presentation. I will collect your responses as we go and ask them of the presenter during the Q&A time toward the end of the presentation. During the webinar, our presenter may pose questions to you. Please use the chat feature to answer these questions. There may also be some polling questions which will pop up on your screen where you can respond. Now let's begin our webinar, part 2, Implications to Enhance Services for Gender Diverse Individuals. And I'd like to introduce our presenter, Dr. Zazzarino. Dr. Anthony Zazzarino is a full-time faculty member at Rutgers University in our Department of Psychiatric Rehabilitation and Counseling Professions, where he currently provides instruction for professional education courses for New Jersey supported housing agencies implementing community support services, the master's program in rehabilitation counseling, and the doctoral program in counselor education and supervision. Dr. Zazzarino is a licensed professional counselor, approved clinical supervisor, and certified psychiatric rehabilitation practitioner. He recently completed his PhD in counselor education and supervision at Walden University, where he focused on improving the lives of sexual minorities with a serious mental illness and enhancing individuals' knowledge of multicultural competence. Dr. Zazzarino is actively presenting at local, state, and national conferences related to psychiatric rehabilitation methods, counseling services, and supervision practices. In addition to his work at Rutgers University, Dr. Zazzarino is a suicide prevention trainer for the Society for the Prevention of Teen Suicide. He facilitates group therapy for adolescents and adults at an intensive outpatient program, provides outpatient counseling services at his private practice, and provides clinical supervision for counselors who need supervised clinical hours in New Jersey. Let's please welcome Dr. Anthony Zazzarino.
Thank you, Joni, and thank you everyone for joining part 2 today. It's a continuation of understanding and figuring out ways that we can improve the lives of the many gender diverse individuals that we work with. Joni already mentioned this webinar being interactive, just like part 1. We will have some polling. There is a little brief video that if you were here for part 1, I troubleshooted to make sure that you can actually see it live and not just hear it. And we'll work through all that. So without further ado, just want to go through what I'm intending to cover today. So I do want to review some key aspects of part one, which I'll do first, but then there will also be a mini review just kind of throughout today's webinar, linking last week's concepts and topics to today. We'll talk about how a sense of community may lead to increased resilience. I'm going to explore different aspects of gender-affirming services, identify the WPATH, which is the World Association for Transgender Health, the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, and many additional resources to help support behavioral health services for gender diverse individuals. I don't think I can stress this enough that last week's and this week's webinar is really only the beginning of our quest for knowledge, that a lot of these resources I'm going to encourage people to continue to follow up, continuing to educate ourselves so that we could better provide services to this much needed population. And then also, I'm going to illustrate and apply the indivisible self-wellness model in a specific case. And in this example, it's a case of Gabriel. So, to start with a brief review, some of the things that we discussed last week is the idea of gender identity and gender expression. And I thought it was really important just to ground everybody back in these concepts again, to keep everybody thinking the same way, on the same page. So when we're discussing gender identity, keeping in mind that gender identity is an individual self of gender, and that there's multiple gender identities, right? So that we're not just focused on that male and female binary. We're looking at different gender identities such as transgender, gender non-binary, agender, and genderqueer. The only person that can identify one's gender is themselves. So recognizing that gender identity is a unique construct to each and every single individual, and that sometimes we have the idea that gender identity might not always match what our perceived expression is. So keeping in mind the idea of gender expression, which is the way that someone might present their gender through actions, appearance, and demeanor. And in that concept, we discussed the importance of using individuals' appropriate pronouns. And in the video last week, we talked about not really even using this, not even saying the word preferred pronouns, because it isn't something that they prefer, it's just something that they are. So keeping in mind, trying to ask people what their preferred pronoun is, being respectful and mindful, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on when we get into gender affirming practices. But also being more mindful of just using gender neutral pronouns. One example of that we talked about last week was the gender neutral pronoun of they, and they being a singular pronoun. The other thing that we just talked about, just to get everybody back up on the same page, is the historical nature of where we're coming from, that this isn't just something that's popping up over the last 5-10 years, but the fact that we've been working with gender diverse individuals since the early 50s, if not even earlier. And recognizing that, unfortunately, the mental health system with certain diagnoses has led to further stigmatization and oppression of gender diverse individuals, but recognizing that there is an important factor in helping individuals create resiliency because of all of the gender minority stressors that people experience. We will talk a little bit more about the gender minority stressors today, but to get us started, I wanted to talk about that sense of resilience. So about a month ago, I did the webinars on sexual minorities, and we talked a lot about the idea of connection and that sense of community and that sense of belonging. And we did so in terms of discussing people's outward representation through the use of different flags. And we discussed that, when we see the rainbow flag, we recognize that that is a flag that's representative of the LGBTQ plus population. However, what we fail to recognize is the subcultures or the subsets of that population and how each group of individuals can have a symbol in which they can connect to and feel like they belong in a greater sense. So we did this activity kind of similar last time, but I'm going to do it again this time. So up on your screen, we have our first poll. So you see the flag on the left. It's a yellow flag with a purple circle in the middle. And I'm going to ask, you can see on the side, you have either agender, intersex, gender fluid, transgender, or gender non-binary. So I only have about 28% of the votes in, so I want everybody to just take a moment and identify what gender identity do you believe this flag represents? Give you 5 more seconds. All right, let's see the results. Okay, this is exactly what I was actually thinking would happen. We see a really wide variety of different answers. So the winning answer with this poll, we have 31% say it is gender fluid, 28% say intersex and non-binary, and 14% say it is agender. And interesting enough, nobody said transgender. And possibly, I think part of that reason is we are more societally aware of the transgender flag because it is the one most commonly used nowadays with coupled with the rainbow flag to indicate not only the sexual minority flag, but also the gender identity flag. What I will say is that the correct answer for this first poll is the second answer. It is intersex. So we're looking at the yellow flag with the purple circle belongs to the gender identity of intersex. Oh, I didn't show you the results. Sorry about that. Okay, so let's go to polling number 2. So here we have a flag that has about 5 colors, a light pink, a white, a purple, a black, and a blue. These probably will get a little easier as we go along because you could eliminate, or maybe you can, or maybe you can't. Maybe there's some duplicates, you never know. So let's see what people think. We have about 38% of the people, so you can register. Ooh, and in our chat, thank you, Emily, for adding that extra information. It's really neat, and I think there could be a whole webinar on just the makeup and the purpose behind each of these flags. Certain concepts today could also be broken out when we talk about even the coming out process, and that's why I say this is only, I think, the beginning of our knowledge. Okay, so let's see. I'm going to end the polling, share the results. So you can see here, nobody picked intersex, perhaps because we just did that one, but that's okay. So we have 62% of individuals saying gender fluid, 15% say transgender, 15% say non-binary, and 8% say agender. So the correct answer here is gender fluid. So 62% of you got it right. I have to say too, something that's interesting to me as we're going through this is if any of you were on the webinar about a month ago, the first two, I think, flags that we demonstrated, there was a much greater accuracy, which I think says something to our acknowledgement and our awareness of sexual identities versus gender identities. And part of that, I think, is maybe because of the overarching idea of the transgender population, and then not giving as much thought and power to all these other gender identities. All right, let's go to the third one. Launch the poll. All right, and here we have a flag that has a yellow stripe, a white stripe, a purple stripe, followed by a black stripe. So which gender identity do you believe this belongs with, or this identifies to? Give it about 4 more seconds. All right, I will stop the poll. We have a little bit more of a direct answer. So if 74% identify as non-binary, identify this flag as non-binary, 21% say agender, 3% said gender fluid and transgender. The interesting point of this is that if you notice, there is no blue or pink, which does represent the idea of the non-binary. So we're not looking at masculine or feminine, no traditional blue or pink, but we are somewhere along that spectrum. So in case I wasn't clear, this flag absolutely identifies with the non-binary gender identity. All right, the fourth one, this should get easier. There we go. Black, gray, white, green, white, gray, black. Black, gray, white, green, white, gray, black. All right, we'll do about 5 more seconds. All right, we'll end the poll and share the results. So if we can see here, again, the majority of us say agender. I think it might be process of elimination at this point. And 89% of you were correct. So we can see that this flag, the black, gray, white, green, white, gray, black, which is really fun to say pretty quickly, actually, if you want to try it out, is representative of the gender identity of agender. And then last but not least, we will just show this flag. This is probably one that people are most familiar with. Blue, pink, white, pink, and blue. We'll just do 5 seconds more on this one, because this also is a good test to see who's paying attention. because by process of elimination, this is the last flag up there. And we see that 94% of you did get this one right, that this flag is representative and symbolizes the transgender community. So I do this activity for a specific reason. We talked about last week the idea that individuals that are gender diverse face a lot of social stigmatization. There's a lot of ridicule. They experience prejudice and discrimination, and they face a lot of significant health disparities. We know this. We know this anecdotally. We know this empirically. But what we don't seem to recognize is that sometimes, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, about gender affirming practices, seeing a symbol of what I identify as and seeing that symbol creates a sense of calm, it creates a sense of safety, and it creates a sense of community. Now, it might be very difficult to have every flag of every country, of every sexual identity, of every gender identity hanging in your office or outside. I don't know if we have enough wall space for that. I know my office doesn't. But what we can do is at least be more aware, and there's different posters that have all the sexual and gender identity flags. So you have one poster that just symbolizes it, or at least having one of those flags. And I think the most common one that we see today is the transgender flag. And it recognizes some sense of awareness. As a behavioral health care worker, just identifying one flag does demonstrate that, hey, I am fully aware that there are people that identify as something different than male or female. I also am aware that there is more than just a cisgender individual, and I'm doing my part to demonstrate that I am welcoming and I'm open for that. So to work through all of this, if we know that many gender diverse individuals experience on a larger scale much more stigma, prejudice, discrimination, marginalization, we know that there's a much greater impact on their education, employment, and housing. But we also know that many gender diverse individuals might not feel comfortable coming into counseling. One of the things that we need to be aware of is ourselves, right? Making the first steps to change our way that we work and demonstrate that as behavioral health care workers, that we are willing and able to affirm different gender identities, different gender expressions and presentations beyond just that male-female binary. How do we do that? We'll talk about that in a little bit, but just recognizing and just being here today is one of the ways to gain some knowledge, gain some education that there is something that's not, there is something different that's not that traditional male and female. And part of that also is acknowledging our own biases. I will show a little, a 6-minute video, I think that is really interesting and demonstrates what, even if consciously we say that we're not biased, unconsciously or implicitly, we do have a propensity to have our own preconceived notions, our own biases that might impact the way that we interact with people of the gender diverse community. And the only way that we can work through that is first if we can acknowledge them. And that's true of working with any multicultural construct, right? If we're working with any person, we need to acknowledge our own and be more aware of what biases implicitly or consciously that we might have about how that might interact or impact our relationship. We also have to recognize the different intersections of identities and also give each of us some sort of slack that, guess what, we may miss up, we may misstep. This happens every now and then, even to myself in my IOP program that I do work at part-time, where I'm working with maybe 1 day a week. And sometimes we have new intakes and I don't get the chance to read through their history, and I do make a mishap, and I do misgender somebody in group. And I might use the wrong pronoun. And part of that is being responsible to understand that we can make a mistake, but most importantly, not letting that mistake happen unnoticed, and apologizing for that, and correcting yourself so that we don't continue to make that same mistake. So in order to increase our own competence as a behavioral health care workforce, part of that is increasing our own awareness. So one of the things that we've done last week is one way to increase our own awareness about the range of gender identities and expression beyond that male and female. So we talked about transgender, we talked about genderqueer, we talked about agender, we talked about gender non-binary, we talk about cisgender. So understanding what all of those different gender identities are, and also discussing how sometimes one's gender expression might not comport with what is naturally perceived with that specific identity. However, that one's expression does not define their identity. The other thing about this, and I think this video, and I'll apologize, I think I watched like 20 different videos, so I'm not quite sure if this video that I'm going to show highlights this aspect, but the complexities and the ongoing nature of the coming out process. I even shared this last week about the idea of many universities right now and many larger corporations thinking of asking workers to use their preferred pronouns in their email signature. And I think that's a good idea in philosophy, to be able to empower people to state what their preferred pronoun is. However, it's a cautionary task because you might be working with somebody who isn't comfortable or isn't ready to be out as somebody who identifies as a they, them, or a her, or a he. So in reality, if that person isn't comfortable and then has to maybe write in the email signature that my preferred pronoun is a he, when in reality I do identify as a she, I just don't want that to come across in or have that conversation in my work environment, I'm further oppressing and increasing my own internalized gender phobia, which can impact my own mental health in that way. Or if I do indicate the proper pronoun, then I am coming out and have to then have that conversation or have anybody who I then encounter be associated with that. So part of that is recognizing that the coming out process is not a simple, easy process. It's not an easy conversation. It takes a lot more than an hour-and-a-half webinar to get into. But at least being aware that that coming out process is very unique to everyone, and that it doesn't fit in a nice, easy box. The research talks about how understanding and being more aware of transphobia, heterosexism, and cisgenderism. I was just having a conversation about this with some colleagues this morning about researchers doing research and publishing, and how maybe they started publishing in with their biological name, and then at some point in their career they've transitioned to the identity that they believe that they should be, and they've changed their name, and now all of their research is in two separate names. And how that, even if now I'm identifying as a female and I live my life as a female and people only know me now as a female, how if I go to apply for a new job and I'm listing all of my different research publications and it's in both names, in essence, I now have to tell my employer that, yes, I am a trans woman. And what is that conversation like? And I think that's where the research talks about limiting people's career and employment opportunities, maybe not out of discrimination, but out of fear of discrimination. So maybe I won't seek employment somewhere because I don't feel like going through that process again. Being more aware of that difference between gender diverse and gender expression. We talked about that last week. We began a review with that this week. And having a lot of different trans and gender diverse resources and referrals. At the end of this PowerPoint, I think I have about 2 different slides of resources for everyone to use and provide to anybody that they're working with. But also the World Professional Association of Trans Health, the WPATH, and I'm going to take you to that website and help you navigate that a little bit, is a very, very must-view website if you will ever work with, and even if you don't think you're ever going to work with people that are of a different gender diversity, you most likely will. So I will encourage everybody to take a look at that. Emily, that's a really good point, and I'm going to get to that in a couple slides from now. So Emily talks in the chat, I've seen so many places have only male or female options on documentation. I've heard of folks deciding to not even apply to jobs just as seeing that kind of paperwork. The other issue with that is there's also individuals and, you know, in some organizations that are a little bit more more open and more progressive in terms of forms and different check boxes, and might have trans woman, gender diverse, and have different options. But if I'm an individual that identifies as a female, I might just identify as a female, want to click female, and then it's that conflict of, well, which box do I check, right? Do I check female? Do I check trans female? Do I check other? What will people think if I check other? And all of these different questions and thoughts and processes are being thought about and do impact people's ability to move forward, where sometimes as a cisgendered individual, we don't even think about all of these different thought processes. I will say when I go to an office or I fill out paperwork, I don't second guess which box I check. You know, because it says male, I identify as a male, bam, that's it. I think this video, I'm not going to give you this example because I think the video that I talk about talks a little bit about TSA and traveling and all that comes into play. It's just a lot of things that we take for granted that are added stressors, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, right? When we talk about the minority stress model, we talk about the idea of the external stigma, but also that internal stigma. So these different levels of thought and how that impacts, and how the idea of stigma can impact different just decisions and normal everyday opportunities for everyone else. The other thing that we have to be more aware of is the fact that we alone might not have all the information that we need to work with this population or work with any population in general. So thinking about individuals and groups that we may seek collaboration and consultation from. So once we work through us, right, once we work through our own biases, our own awareness, we then have to think about the environment in which we are inviting people to. Creating a safe and supportive and affirming environment is crucial to the behavioral health services of gender diverse people, right? We know that textbook knowledge itself is not sufficient. That we can say that we know everything there is to know about how to work with somebody who is gender diverse, but if we haven't taken into account the environment in which we are asking people to come into, we're failing to um, uh, think about how that initial reaction and how that initial viewpoint can impact the lives of gender diverse people. So one of the ways is to visibly display a non-discrimination policy. Um, Having gender diverse inclusive materials. One of the other things is having a unisex or individual bathroom. A lot of the videos that I was watching also talks about how a lot of people with the whole bathroom debate are fearful that the gender diverse or transgender individuals might, do something inappropriate. That's kind of the narrative that's out there. When in fact, people fail to even take into consideration the fear or the stress or the anxiety that gender diverse individuals have when it even comes time for using a bathroom. If they identify as gender neutral, which bathroom do you pick if you have different female and male bathrooms? If I identify as a woman, but maybe I'm not far enough along in my transition, and I go into a bathroom that's labeled male, I then have to look at that and think about I'm going into a bathroom for a group of people in which I don't belong to. And I might be going in there and other men are looking at me thinking, who is this woman? But if I go into a woman's bathroom and I'm still not really far enough along, they might question, why is this male in this bathroom? And so what we see in the research is gender diverse individuals have a higher rate of urinary tract infections than any other population because of the fear of even using public bathrooms. And it goes so much more and so much further than just safety and I want to use the bathroom that I belong to. It's about the environment. It's about creating a safe, supportive, and affirming environment that when somebody comes into my office, I don't have to think about it. I just go into this one bathroom that's either unisex that everybody can use, or I have their own individual bathroom. And then the other piece too is continuing with staff training and openness. So attending workshops like this, hoping that other staff and other behavioral health care workers continue to engage in conversations that demonstrate a level of acceptance and openness. Because believe it or not, and I think as behavioral health care workers, we know that the way we think and our views do impact the way we interact with people. And that could be done either verbally or non-verbally. So demonstrating a sense of openness and acceptance tends to only come after we continue to gain knowledge. Because as a human race and as a human body, we tend to fear things that we don't know enough about. So the more that we become knowledgeable, the more that we will feel more comfort. This next slide about gender affirming practices speaks to that idea about that, the forms and what do we even write down. A lot of forms are now shifting over to write-in sections. So why, as an agency or an organization, am I asking you to fit into one of my boxes? Why not just leave it open-ended and give you the power to tell me what identity who you are? Having write-in sections and blank sections gives more power to the individual to choose and to articulate to people who they feel they are and who they identify as. The use of pronouns and name, use pronouns and name the person request. We talked about that earlier. Using the preferred language and awareness of the gender diversity issues creates safety that increases the client's comfortability with the relationship. If we mess up, we mess up, but please apologize and continue to affirm the individual's choice in the pronoun or the identity that they identify as. Respect confidentiality and don't out somebody. That's really important, right? So we talk about charts. So individuals' charts should alert staff that the person has a preferred pronoun. This pronoun should be used throughout the visit. However, making sure that the individual's charts, or when we're in communication with other people, that we respect people's privacies. That if the person doesn't want to come out to maybe their employer, if they're coming to you as part of an EAP, that we're not divulging some of that information and unintentionally outing that individual. Tori, you make a really great point about, even though open-ended questions are nice for individual organizations, many organizations have reporting requirements for funding. So that is something in a couple slides. I will get into it and show the website for the WPATH and how they're attempting to make some changes on the macro level. Yeah, Kristen, that's another good point. I think sometimes Kristen says, I used to have an LGBTQ foster care program, and we realized we were outing kids by putting them in that program. This is where things get tricky, and that things are not as cut and dry and as easy as we think. Even with good intent, and Kristen, I'm going to say that you went about this with good intent, of having a specialized program that focuses on helping individuals in this population, but recognizing that how you publicize or how you promote, intentionally or unintentionally, you are outing people that then come and not giving people the respect to, I guess, that privacy that people deserve. The other gender affirming practices just goes back to, I think, the core of human capacity of empathy, compassion, care, sensitivity, support, directness, and flexibility. Yes, we're talking about that related to gender diverse individuals, but we should also be talking about that with any individuals that we're working with. Everybody, no matter who they are, deserves empathy and compassion and support, and being flexible in terms of how we create services, how we go about working with people. Something to think about if you are providing services is creating accountability for transphobic remarks. There might be people in a program that and this has happened in a group that I've run, where one member of the group outwardly started bashing transgender individuals, and there was a individual in the group that did identify as transgender but was not out to the group, and that was really difficult. Like, how do you have that conversation? Because if I go to that one person who created all those marks and said, listen, that was really offensive, needing to make sure that I'm not outing that person in the group that doesn't want everybody else to say. And so having that universal code of, we are not bad-mouthing or bashing any group of people, and what is the accountability when somebody does that in a group or in a system. Modeling acceptance and supporting diversity, and then again, knowledge about local resources. So this is the slide that I was talking about related to the WPATH, the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. So they were developed to promote evidence-based care, education, research, advocacy, public policy, and respect in transgender health. While I'm going through this, I would love to see in the chat if you can all just do me a quick favor, and if you can type it, that would be helpful. Either a yes or a no. Have you heard or seen of the WPATH before? So the WPATH has established internationally accepted standards of care for treatment of individuals with gender dysphoria. These internationally accepted guidelines are designed to promote the health and welfare of transgender, transsexual, and gender variant persons in all cultural settings. The standards of care are updated and revised as new specific information becomes available. So this is my favorite piece, right? So these standards of care not only come in 18 different languages, but they're free. Now, there's not much in the healthcare system that is free. So this is a free resource that you can all download and help guide your practices when you're working with transgender or gender diverse individuals. It has many resources regarding legal, youth, schools, and families. There's a section for recommended readings and even how to find a provider. So I'm stopping my share so that I could go to the website and show you a little bit about it. So this is the website for the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. This is what I was talking about, the standards of care. It comes in all of these 18 languages, which I think is so helpful when we're talking about multicultural competence. We're recognizing that there are other cultures out there that might be able to benefit, that are also identify as gender diverse. You can click it and download it. It is completely free. It's really, really helpful. If you look at the education section, you can see that there's different upcoming conferences. There's one in DC, which for many of us should be pretty close. It's not that far away, September 4th through 8th. Gives you a little bit of information. There's also the International Fascial Gender Symposium. Oh, we just missed it. Sorry. Which was in Johns Hopkins. Resources. This is what I was talking about in terms of resources. If you're working with a school system, you can just click this resource and it gives you some really good information about PFLAGs, PFLAG and Trans Youth Family Allies, recommended readings if anybody wants to, and so you have all of these resources, and then I give you some more at the end of this, but if there's anything extra that you would like to learn about, or recommended readings for when you're working with families that might be struggling to work through maybe their child's transition. Finding a provider, another great resource that individuals that are more educated and more highly trained to work with this population, they could join this. And if any of you are not on this and you feel like you are a gender affirming and gender competent counseling or just behavioral health clinic, you can contact them to add yourself to this as well. The standards of care, which is here. So I just think it's important to know these different resources and the different resources that are out there. Oops. It's not what I wanted to do, sorry. All right, so I see a lot of no's, so congratulations. If you have not taken anything away from today, you already have learned a remarkable resource. that really is so important and so valuable to working with gender diverse people. All right, gender reassignment conversation. I said this a little bit earlier on, there's so many different topics that we can delve so much deeper in. This is not one of them because this conversation is a very important conversation and a very complex conversation that we do not have the time to give the respect that it deserves. We did talk a lot about, not a lot, we did talk a little bit about last week how there are many individuals that identify as either a trans man or a trans woman and decide not to have gender reassignment surgery. And part of that, and I think the video that I'll show in a few slides speaks directly to the idea that, first of all, it's very expensive, and only recently are some insurances covering parts of it. But there are still a lot of health risks associated with it. So what I will say about that is, in order to, if you are a behavioral health care provider and you are working with people and they are trying to navigate that conversation about gender reassignment surgery, one is go to the WPATH and gain some more information, but just know that it's important to discuss relevant options, risks and benefits, evaluate capacity for the medical decision making, and if the age of medical consent is not reached, then consent the legal guardians and arranging suitable referral to care. Part of this is creating that empathic relationship where you're fostering the gender identity discovery and adjustment. In the case study that I will get to today, it really speaks to the idea of one's expectations of what life will be like after they have this gender reassignment surgery versus what actually happens in reality. And just continuing to educate ourselves as much as we can in order to be able to guide that conversation. So we did talk about this last week, right? About how many gender diverse individuals experience gender minority stress from both external and internal stressors. So one of the things to recognize is we need to normalize the adverse impact of the gender minority stress in order to kind of navigate through this system and through this framework. Facilitate emotional awareness, regulation, and acceptance, and empower assertive communication. And I talk about the assertive communication because these are people whose voices that are often not heard, or at least the perception is there that people don't hear or validate who I am, even in terms of how people refer to me. So here I am identifying as a female, but people always refer to me as a male, and I feel oppressed and marginalized in that way. So empowering assertive communication gives individuals the ability to work, I don't want to say fight back, but to stand up for themselves and gain back the power that's being lost. Recognizing the ability to restructure minority stress cognitions, those negative thoughts, those negative self-deprecating thoughts, validating the unique strengths of gender nonconforming individuals. And one of the ways to do that, and after this little video, we'll get into a wellness model that focuses on strengths and focuses on really capitalizing on those unique strengths. Fostering a supportive relationship and community. We talked about that ability and what a sense of community does in terms of resilience, and affirming healthy and rewarding expressions of gender. Let's celebrate somebody who would like to express themselves the way that they like, and let's affirm that in a healthy, rewarding way. All right, so here is and it's only 6 minutes. It's a video from this individual that talks a little bit about what it's like to be transgender, and most importantly, I think how to talk and listen to transgender people. So let's watch this, and I believe I still have my chat box open, so if you cannot see it as it's going, please let me know, but it should be working. And if you can't see it, it's okay. You'll have the link, and just listen.
Hi, I'm Jack, and I'm transgender. Let me take a guess at some of the thoughts that might be running through your head right now. Transgender, wait, does that mean that they're actually a man or actually a woman? Wonder if he's had the surgery yet. Oh, now I'm looking at his crotch. Look to the right, that's a safe place to look. Yes, I knew it. No real man has hips like those. My friend's daughter is transgender. I wonder if they know each other. Oh my gosh, he is so brave. I would totally support his right to use the men's bathroom. Wait, but how does he use the bathroom? How does he have sex? Okay, let's stop those hypothetical questions before we get too close for my comfort. I mean, don't get me wrong, I did come here today to share my personal experiences being transgender, but I did not wake up this morning wanting to tell an entire audience about my sex life. I mean, of course, that's the problem with being trans, right? People are pretty much always wondering how we have sex and what kind of equipment we're working with below the belt. Being trans is awkward. And not just because the gender I was assigned at birth mismatches the one I really am. Being trans is awkward because everyone else gets awkward when they're around me. You know, people who support me and all other trans people wholeheartedly are often so scared to say the wrong thing, so embarrassed to not know what they think they should, that they never ask. And part of what was so nerve-wracking about coming out as transgender was knowing that people wouldn't know what I meant. And when someone comes out as gay, people know what that means. But when you come out as trans, you have to face the misconceptions that will color other people's impressions of you even after you've educated them. And you will have to educate them. When I came out, I wrote a 10-page encyclopedic document with a zip file attachment of music and videos that I sent to every single person I came out to. And I kept in my email signature for months afterwards, because you also don't ever stop coming out. I came out to the accountant helping with my taxes and the TSA agents who didn't know which one of them should pat me down, the man or the woman. I mean, I just came out to everyone watching this. When I came out to my dad, to my great relief, he was totally cool with me being trans. But as soon as I started talking about physically transitioning, he freaked. And I quickly realized it was because he, like so many other people, think that physical transition means just one thing: the surgery. Now listen, if there were one magical surgery that could turn me into a tall, muscular, societally perfect image of a man overnight, I'd sign up in a heartbeat. Unfortunately, it isn't that simple. There are dozens of different gender-affirming surgeries, from chest surgeries to bottom surgeries to facial feminization and man sculpting. Many trans people will only ever undergo one procedure in their lifetime, if that. Maybe because they don't personally feel the need, but also because they're expensive, and health insurance is only beginning to cover them. Instead, the first step for a trans person seeking physical transition is usually hormone replacement therapy. Hormones are why I have a deeper voice and some sparse whiskers on my neck and a giant pimple on my chin. Basically, they put you through a second puberty. It's a blast. Now, because our transitions are slower and steadier than historic misconceptions can lead people to believe, there can be some confusion about when to call someone by their new name and pronouns. There's no distinct point in physical transition at which a trans person becomes their true gender. As soon as they tell you their new name and pronouns, that's when you start using that name and pronouns. And I know it can be difficult to make the change. You might slip up here and there. I've slipped up myself with other trans people. But you know, I always think to myself, if we can change from calling Puff Daddy to P. Diddy, and if we apologize profusely when we use the wrong gender pronoun for someone's pet cat, I mean, I think we can make the same effort for the real humans in our lives. Now, there is no topic that makes other people more awkward about trans people than public bathrooms. The bathrooms, the latest political flashpoint for LGBT opponents. Here's a fun fact about bathrooms. More US congressmen have been convicted of assaulting someone in a public bathroom than trans people have been. Now, the truth is, we trans people are so much more scared of you than you are of us. It is a huge point of discussion in trans communities about which bathroom to start using and when, so we don't attract attention that could lead to violence against us. I personally started using the men's room when I started getting confused and frightened looks in the women's room, even though I was petrified to start going into the men's room. Often we opt to just not go to the bathroom at all. A 2015 national survey of trans people found that 8% of us had had a urinary tract infection in the past year as a result of avoiding restrooms. These bathroom bills aren't protecting anyone. All they're doing is ensuring that when trans people are assaulted in bathrooms, the law will no longer be on our side when we report it. Being trans means a daily onslaught of these misconceptions. And I have it pretty easy. I am a white, able-bodied guy sitting nearly at the peak of Privilege Mountain. For non-binary people, for trans women, for trans people of color, it is so much harder. So I've given you a starter pack of trans knowledge that I hope will lead to more learning on your own. Talk to trans people. Listen to us. Amplify our voices. Take the heat off of us and educate those around you so we don't have to every time. Maybe someday when I say, "Hi, I'm Jack, and I'm transgender," the only response I'll get is, "Hi, nice to meet you." Thank you.
All right. Thank you for taking your 6 minutes out to watch that video. I think Jack shares a lot of great information. And I think in his opening, when he talks about some of the initial thoughts that run through our minds when we hear that somebody is trans or gender diverse, those are, and if we're honest with ourselves, some of those initial thoughts that he had mentioned might be some of those initial thoughts that have gone through our minds at some point. And that's part of that awareness piece and part of that implicit bias that we have and where our thoughts go. A couple other really good points I think that Jack brings up is just and we highlighted that today already, the additional layer of the coming out process and all of these stressors associated with the minority stress. And, and Jack ends this conversation with just being able to have a regular conversation, just like you would with anybody else. And that really speaks to the idea of building on people's strengths. So understanding all of this, it's important to potentially have this idea of a wellness model in our arsenal of tools in order to work with gender diverse individuals. So using a wellness model for treatment with transgender and gender diverse clients as an alternative to the deficit-based medical models that are harmful to gender diverse clients. And I think last week I discussed in the 70s, a lot of mental health work was truly focused on conversion therapy and repressing gender identity issues. So, this wellness model is a way to unpack some of those years of added oppression and added marginalization, and shifting the support to a strengths-based perspective. So what we have up here is the individual self-wellness model. And I'm just going to refer to it as wellness model. It's often referred to the is well model, but honestly, in saying it a couple times, it just doesn't flow right. So for the sake of this webinar, I will just refer to it as the wellness model. But this model is an empirically validated, strengths-based wellness model, which is grounded in Adlerian theory of individual psychology. It was proposed that the self was indivisible, meaning that the body, the mind, and the spirit are integrated and fundamentally inseparable. The wellness model consists of 5 wellness factors of self, and you can see them here. The creative self, which takes into consideration one's thinking, emotions, control, work, and positive humor. The coping self, which is their leisure, stress management, self-work, and realistic beliefs. The social self, which falls into friendship and love. The essential self, which is spirituality, gender identity, cultural identity, and self-care. And physical self, which is the exercise and nutrition. So the developing awareness of how cognition affects feelings and the overall well-being, clients can learn to recognize and validate their positive and negative emotions. Using this, clients can increase self-efficacy, their positive outlook on life, and reduce stress by accepting their feelings and enhancing hopefulness. Satisfaction with work contributes to an individual's feelings of fulfillment and self-worth. And we've already discussed the factors and issues associated with employment and how individuals that identify as gender diverse or transgender often have more negative experiences with work and employment. By exploring the meaning clients can attribute to their work, counselors may help clients reflect on their unique strengths and talents that contribute to the development of their sense of self-agency and the overall purpose in life. The coping self domain includes those 4 components that I mentioned already: the stress management, self-worth, realistic beliefs, and leisure. Exploring these facets may assist behavioral health care workers and clients to acquire effective coping skills and examine the accuracy and usefulness of their beliefs and their feelings of self-worth. By examining how individuals organize their leisure, behavioral health care workers may help them recognize the importance of leisure in developing effective coping and stress management skills. So the issues of gender identity are described in the essential self domain, and Myers and Sweeney define gender identity as a satisfaction with one's gender, feeling supported in one's gender, and transcendence of gender identity. So although these issues of gender identity relates to only one component of this wellness model, transgender individuals may present for a variety of life and mental health related stressors. So recognizing that people that are coming to receive services from the behavioral health care force are not always coming just for their gender identity issues, that they are more than just their gender identity, that they face many other negative life events just like everybody else. And that's why it's important to be more aware of all 5 concepts. So seeking counseling services does not mean gender identity is problematic. The stress of experiencing transphobia or stigma from family, friends, co-workers, and the community can push transgender and gender diverse individuals to seek behavioral health care services to improve their well-being and overall quality of life. Because of this, there's a strong calling for behavioral health care workers to promote the well-being and advocate for the gender diverse community. Behavioral health care workers are encouraged to embrace that strengths-based and theoretically grounded approaches to explore the issues of gender diverse clients. So let's look at this model in the case of Gabriel. So Gabriel's background information is that we are going to say, and you have this PowerPoint, you will have this PowerPoint, so you'll have time to reflect on this later on, because we're going to go through this pretty quickly in case there's any questions. But Gabriel, we're going to say, is a 35-year-old trans Hispanic man who has lived as a man for 4 years and completed gender confirmation surgery a year ago. His family of origin is large and close-knit. He's lived in the same large metropolitan area his entire life, currently lives with a roommate in a home he bought 5 years ago, has a history of treatment for depression and anxiety, and is currently seeking support to address intra and interpersonal issues related to his family of origin and career. So what I'm going to do over these next few slides is break down the information that Gabriel's presented at intake and help navigate it through each of those 5 wellness domains. So for instance, Gabriel reports frequently feeling overwhelmed by loneliness, family rejection, and what he perceives as a lack of viable career opportunities. He reports feelings of low self-worth, lack of purpose, and struggling financially, and believes that these feelings are due to gender transition. So first off, we have the physical self, sorry. And for these next couple slides, I will have all that information that was on his intake here on your left, and then the is well domain on your right, and exactly how you could apply that. So exploring each of those 5 domains of the indivisible self and that influence the indivisible self, the behavioral health care worker and Gabriel can develop a holistic, strength-based set of goals and treatment plan to address his presenting and underlying concerns. By considering and including the transgender competencies, the behavioral health care worker can also help Gabriel identify domains and environmental contexts in which difficulties might be related to his gender. So beginning with the physical self domain, the worker and Gabriel can explore his feelings and beliefs about his physical appearance and his report that his body is a true reflection of his gender. Initially, this domain seems to be an area of strength for Gabriel, right? Because across several of those environmental contexts. However, if we look a little deeper, the behavioral health care worker could recognize several underlying issues that may need to be explored within this domain. For instance, knowing that the ongoing hormone therapy is necessary and often not covered by health insurance, the healthcare worker may explore whether financial issues are impacting Gabriel's ability to continue treatment. Or the behavioral health care worker can also use this initial discussion to investigate whether Gabriel's primary concerns are related to his gender identity, as well as his beliefs and feelings of self-worth and authenticity related to passing as a cisgendered man in a different environmental context. Moving on to the coping self, the healthcare worker and Gabriel can use this discussion about self-worth and beliefs to examine the coping self. The healthcare worker can help Gabriel become more aware of unconscious beliefs and thoughts, socially embedded stereotypes, and invalidating defenses and coping mechanisms. Considering how trans prejudice and discrimination in all environmental contexts might affect Gabriel's own feelings of self-worth, the healthcare worker can help Gabriel overcome his own internalized negative attitudes and beliefs using affirming interventions. Related to social self, based on Gabriel's own reported concerns, there seem to be a number of difficulties related to social self. Family rejection, isolation, and loneliness are all areas where the healthcare worker can assist him in overcoming these obstacles. Although Gabriel's gender status may be a factor, these issues are not unique to the gender diverse populations and can be addressed using a number of different therapeutic interventions. The healthcare worker can also help Gabriel regulate his affects, thoughts, and behaviors during this process. For the creative self, these thoughts and emotions intersect and partly make up the creative self. The creative self also incorporates work and career, areas that Gabriel reports as problematic. Recognizing the intersection of all parts of the indivisible self, Gabriel's intersecting identities as a transgender man, a Hispanic individual, an uncle, an employee, the healthcare worker can help Gabriel evaluate and understand how these different identities intersect and the impact that each has on the whole person. The healthcare worker and Gabriel can also investigate the seemingly incongruence between his comfort with his gender expression and feeling of true self, and his unwillingness to return to the previous, more fulfilling career if he must disclose his gender status. So what is this effect on the individual self of giving up one part of who he is, which is his career, to gain another, which is his gender? And then last but not least, the essential self. Finally, reorganizing the social environmental context and their impacts on Gabriel. The healthcare worker can help Gabriel examine his own spirituality, gender, cultural identities through the lens of the transgender and gender diverse competencies. This brings the understanding and awareness to the possibility, to the possibly dissonant messages, stereotypes, and embedded invalidations that might exist. The healthcare worker helps Gabriel with his own self-care and ability to navigate and process all of the disparate and intersecting internal and external factors to become comfortable with not only who he is, but how he got here. So that's just a small case study that you can use and reflect on, and there's some really good resources at the end on how to apply a wellness model when working with gender diverse individuals. But I wanted to leave the webinar today with these two quotes. One was a quote submitted anonymously from transquotes from tumblr.com, which states, "My body does not define who I am. I'm a boy, but my body may show different. I know who I am, and I don't need anyone to tell me and call me what I'm not." And the other one is just be who you are, not who the world wants you to be. And I think that's so important. Both of these are so important when working with gender diverse people, is to validate and empower individuals to increase their self-worth and pride in who they are, and helping people to get to a point of that self-acceptance. So like I promised, in addition to the WPATH, there are all these different resources. There's some different publications that you can look at, thinking about trans ally trainings or LGBT resource centers in your area. You can search for medical providers through the WPATH. There's different conferences, and there's different online supports as well. So with that said, it is exactly 1:20, which gives us about 10 minutes if there are any questions and answers. Like I did say, I know that we did not cover every issue in depth. I know that there's a lot of information that still needs to be covered. But I also know that being a part of this webinar for last week and this week, we are beginning to make a difference. We are beginning to increase our own knowledge and awareness, which will ultimately increase our own competence when working with gender diverse individuals. And hopefully that'll trickle down to gender diverse individuals feeling more welcome and comfortable and safe receiving services from all of us. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your consideration. And with that, I will open it up to questions and answers in case, Joni, there are any. If you didn't already hit the Q&A question and answer thing, you could do so now, or just use the chat box to ask. I do have what I was reading written down. I will also share, where is it? Honestly, if you want to learn more about applying that wellness model, I have the reference up here. It's from the Vera Zelu, Speedlin, Ingram, and Prado article, which really helps discuss how to apply that wellness model to that case of Gabriel. So I know you could not read that. I mean, write all of that down super quick. So for this webinar, it's just getting that understanding, but take a look at this first reference. It's a really good concrete article that outlines exactly what I went through today.
Anthony, there's another question. someone is interested in offering skill development groups in the agency for folks who identify within gender and sexual minority groups, as well as allies. Are there any sources for skill sets and curriculum?
I'll be honest, Tony, I don't know any off the top of my head, but I would almost guarantee that the WPATH has something. I would definitely look at the resources that the World Professional Association of Trans Health has on their website. I will make sure, don't worry, Jennifer, I got what you meant. I will forward this article to Anne and see if it could also, I'll make sure the article gets sent out to everybody who was registered, who got this link. So, because I'll say I couldn't even get it through Rutgers, the Rutgers library system. I had to ask a friend to use their university system to gain access to it and send it to me. So I'll send it out because I think it's a really helpful one. You're welcome. So we will stay on for another, I say 5 minutes because it's 1:23. I mean, if there's anything else, please feel free to reach out either to Joni or to any member of the MHTTC or myself. If you need my email address, please don't look at the screen. I don't want you to get nauseous. But my email address is just my first name dot my last name at rutgers.edu. You can feel free to email me and
one more question, Anthony. We have, other than affirmations, do you have advice for helping a patient coping with overwhelming microaggressions?
I don't know what DT gender stands for.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
What's the D/T? Oh,
Do
do to.
There you go. Yes.
Man, Joni, we're not hip with this lingo. Sorry, that confused me. Other than affirmations, do you have advice? I genuinely do believe that this wellness model is such a great way to explore someone's strengths. And I think if you can come from a strengths perspective, I know in the sexual minority webinar, I talked about the framework of positive psychology. I also think that that could be another type of intervention or modality used with gender diverse people. You know, looking at different interventions that are much more strengths focused and more holistic in nature, I think are really supportive and encouraging.
Anthony, people are asking for clarification. It's anthony.zazzarino@rutgers.edu.
Correct.
Yes.
Make sure you get all those Z's in there, though.
Yes.
Oh, CBT is interesting. I think CBT by nature really does not come from a strengths perspective. So I think it's your own personal style when using that modality, in terms of it could be very much deficit focused about the negative thoughts and the negative behaviors and the negative actions, right? Because we know with CBT, we're talking about how your thoughts impact your beliefs, which impact your behaviors, which impact your feelings. I would be very careful and cautious to make sure you're using more of a combined positive psychology / CBT technique. So focusing on those positive thoughts, right? So what are some of the positive thoughts you have already? Well, how does that impact you behaviorally? So I think that I'm a kind person, and because I think I'm kind, Louis Alvarez, just look at that. Because I think I'm kind, I believe I'm a good person, right? And because I'm a good person, I then do something nice for somebody. So I would spin it in that way, to focus on what are some of the strengths that people have from a positive context.
So yes, the PowerPoint presentation should have been sent out along with the Zoom link, but if you did not receive one, please get in touch with us and we will send you out that copy of the PowerPoint. I believe it also gets sent out again with the evaluations, which you all will be receiving over the next day or two. So please complete the evaluations when you do receive those. And I believe the PowerPoint presentation is sent along with the evaluations. If not, just reply back to Cotty Rivera, who will be sending out the evals, and let her know that you would like a copy of the PowerPoint.
All right. Well, thank you again, everyone. Hope you have a great day. Hope you have a great week and enjoy. I think this is the last of my webinar. So it's been great, and maybe I will chat with some of you all in the fall.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Joni.